And greetings, everyone, and welcome to Buzz for Good, where we talk all things nonprofit, the people they serve, and the good they do. And today I am buzzing about the new executive director of the Harrison Museum of African American Culture in Roanoke, Virginia. E.B. Smith just started the job at a moment of exciting transformation for the museum that's committed to promoting, showcasing, and celebrating the art and history of African Americans for Roanoke Valley citizens and visitors. And so I look forward to sharing that conversation with you in just a moment. But first, my name is Michael Hemphill. I'm the creator and host of the TV show Buzz that airs Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. on Blue Ridge PBS, where we feature the great work of nonprofits throughout Virginia. And we provide the nonprofits with some pro bono marketing resources from our friends at the American Advertising Federation of Roanoke, who donate their time and talent to help these nonprofits achieve more buzz. And I invite you to be part of my newest venture that celebrates nonprofits, a new 30-minute talk show called Buzz Live, which you can attend in person on Thursdays at 6 p.m. at The Spot on Kirk in downtown Roanoke, or by our live stream of these events on our Facebook and YouTube channels, or in March when we broadcast the shows on Blue Ridge PBS. In Buzz Live, I will be chatting with the inspiring people who serve and are served by nonprofits in the Roanoke Valley. And we will feature a musical guest affiliated with a local nonprofit. And for more information, please go to my website, buzzforgood.com. That's buzz, B-U-Z-Z, 4, good.com, as well as my social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube, all at Buzz for Good. And now, here is my conversation with the Harrison Museum of African American Culture's new executive director, E.B. Smith. Well, it is my pleasure to welcome here to Buzz for Good, E.B. Smith, who is the newly appointed executive director of the Harrison Museum of African American Culture in Roanoke. E.B., welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to be here with you, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Absolutely. I want to start off. About 3 years ago, we produced a Buzz episode on the Christiansburg Institute, which I'm sure you know, was one of the very first schools for recently freed slaves, African Americans, opened in 1866 in Montgomery County. Right. And the executive director of Christiansburg Institute, Chris Sanchez, an exceptional guy, he made the comment during our episode that the longest lasting legacy of slavery and Jim Crow South and racism is the under-preservation and under-resourcing of Black history. And I wanted to know what your thoughts are as the incoming executive director of the Harrison Museum of African American Culture.
Well, I think Chris is right on with his assessment. You know, it's knowing where he came from is one of the biggest challenges that African American communities face, and it manifests in many different ways. You know, I recognize it in my own family. My father was born in 1940 in Shreveport, Louisiana, and he didn't really know much about his family. And, you know, he did a lot of genealogical research over the course of his life, and he managed to sort of pull at threads here and there. But, you know, when your ancestry is full of transactions and your relatives were bought and sold, records weren't kept, when you weren't actually thought of as a family, but as livestock, the humanity is drained from your history. And a big part of the work that we have to do now is to sort of reclaim that and start to figure out exactly how we contextualize that for ourselves, not in a traumatic way, but in the sense of pride and legacy that family carries with it, right? Knowing who we really are and what it all means. And so I think organizations like the Christiansburg Institute, as it is now, and the Harrison Museum, are vital to making sure that Black folks know where they come from, what they've accomplished, and can imagine what they will accomplish, but also so that, you know, this country can remember that the history is often much more complicated and nuanced and beautiful than we imagine it is from our general schooling and imagination.
Mm, beautifully put and tragically put, because I'm thinking about a recent Cardinal News story I wrote, and some reader from Northern Virginia reached out to me because her maiden name is Hemphill, which is my last name.
Mm,
And she was asking about my genealogy. And I said, well, I haven't really done a deep dive into it. And so I gave her a little bit of information, and she immediately replied back with, okay, well, here is your grandfather. Here is your great grandfather. And you came from a line of Hemphills who originally came from England in the late 1700s. Um, and,
uh-huh.
that was just with a few clicks of her keyboard, I'm sure. But here I am. I'm
Right.
a white guy in my 50s. And so, unfortunately, of course, there were genealogical records that I could trace my ancestry to. And what you're describing, though, is, the exact reverse for African Americans in this country.
Sure. And there are other factors too. If your ancestors were educated people and they produced documents, letters and bills of sale and deeds to homes and carriages and horses and all kinds of other things that have their
Mm,
handwriting on them, you can figure out where they were and what they were doing. But if you
yeah.
were forbidden from reading and writing, you don't leave that paper trail. And so, um,
Ah,
it's
right.
it's it's critical. It's critical to also, in service of the Christiansburg Institute and others, it's critical to remember what the legacies of education are and the importance of education
Mm,
to the development and maturity of a culture over time.
mm. Well said. Again, joined here on Buzz for Good by E.B. Smith, the newly appointed executive director of the Harrison Museum of African American Culture in Roanoke, Virginia. Um, E.B., share with me, you mentioned a little bit about your father being from Louisiana. Uh,
Mhm.
Share with us just some of your personal history as it pertains to, how you got interested in African American history and culture and, the work that you're doing now.
Well, my professional life started in the arts. I was a theater artist initially.
Okay.
I trained as an actor, and I performed in regional theater across the country. But my father started a consulting business in the 80s, 1984. He had a PhD in behavioral science, and he was very interested in creating opportunities in corporations and nonprofits for people of color and women. And so he started doing executive search. And so the dinner table conversation was for a long time about, increasing representation and figuring out how to help underserved and underrepresented populations be more competitive in the marketplace and eradicating the kind of biases that have led to, disparate impact. And so I've always been mindful of it over
Hmm.
the course of my life. It's always been part of the conversation. Um, and after a long career in acting, I did some consulting in the family business on the side. Um, but after I left the stage behind, I did a master's degree in arts administration, and I'm working on a PhD in organizational development.
And Harrison, did they bring you in to do some consulting for this work? And then that's how you kind of rose to the,
That's kind of how it happened. So
yeah.
I was engaged by the Harrison in August to do the strategic plan for the organization. And I had been sort of discussing with the Prices back and forth, and uh, and Charles Price started calling me, and eventually I said, "Do you want me to help you? Do you want me to help do this work?" Um, and so the board hired me to do the strategic plan, and we put a, a pretty, if I do say so myself, pretty cool plan together by
Hmm.
around November. And when we presented it at the board meeting, they kind of looked at me and said, "That sounds great. It's a lot of work. When do you start?" so we worked out this arrangement. I'm really thrilled to be joining the organization in this capacity too, because going through that strategic process really gave me extraordinary insight on the history of the organization and the stakeholders. um, and it's really given me a great love for the place, and so I'm thrilled to help guide them through this next chapter. um, and my focus has really always been about how to tell stories that accomplish a couple things. One, uh, make voices heard that haven't been heard and need to be heard. That's one piece. But the other piece is engaging audiences from across racial, political, gendered spectrums, to really contextualize these stories as part of a common conversation.
Mm.
Because none of it happened in a vacuum, and we were all there. Um, and understanding that Black history is part of American history.
Right.
It's but it's not taught in the same way that other histories are taught. And I think when we kind of take a step back and look from 30,000 feet, we start to realize just how inexorably connected we are to each other and how dependent on each other we are. And valuing each other for that, and valuing ourselves for the contributions we made is super important. So that's how I come to the work as a theater artist. I did a lot of classical theater, a lot of Shakespeare, a lot of Marlowe, a lot of the Greeks.
Okay.
Um,
Real quick, favorite
but I
Shakespeare
also
character
favorite Shakespeare character,
that you performed.
King Lear, I have to say.
Nice.
I was a pretty young King Lear,
Yeah.
obviously, but it's an extraordinary piece of work.
Yeah.
But in addition to all the classical work, the sort of European tradition that I did, I was also very fortunate to perform titles by Olorotimi and Wole Soyinka, African playwrights, who wrote in a sort of epic classical style. August Wilson, Black American playwright.
Mm-hmm.
And so it allowed me to kind of contextualize the work that I had done in a much more textured ecosystem, I guess. And as I left the theater, I wanted to find other ways to express the stories that I had been exposed to, and the sort of revolution that it had caused in me. I think museums are an extraordinary vehicle for storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
The act of preservation is an act of love, and as you preserve objects, artifacts, and traditions, you have to preserve the stories along with them. And so, sharing those stories in a dramatic narrative form while you're experiencing the conditions that the objects evoke, is super powerful. It also enables us, I think, to look into the past to see what ingenuity looks like. I think about the collection at the Harrison Museum. There are objects there, like a ventilator that was used by the Hunting Life-Saving Crew in Gainsborough, and it's like this it's like this arcane device with tubes and gauges and dials, and it's enormous. And now those devices are the size of a briefcase.
Yeah.
But then they were these enormous contraptions. But we were able to save lives with them, and they paved the way for the future. And I wonder if a lot of young folks today realize that that's their legacy. That tradition of life-saving and medical excellence that exists in Roanoke in particular, both with the Hunting Life-Saving Crew, but Burl Memorial Hospital, Dr. Clater. I mean, these are stories that can remind us that we're capable of extraordinary things.
Yeah.
And so my hope is that as we sort of move forward and evolve the programming at the museum, we can help people, more and more people, understand what they could be capable of in the future by remembering what we've accomplished so far.
Once again, joined here on Buzz for Good by E.B. Smith, who is the newly appointed executive director of the Harrison Museum of African American Culture in Roanoke. And you just said something I thought was really fascinating, that, the act of preservation is an act of love. Is that perhaps the reason why African American history has not been so well preserved in our country? Because there's just not a lot of love for African Americans on a, systemic way?
That's an interesting question, and probably,
Yeah.
probably. I think African American history for this country is challenging, and that's no surprise. What happened to enslaved Africans for the first 300 years of this country's growth and maturity, um, is our original sin as Americans.
Yep.
And I think as we think about what that's wrought, it causes a lot of consternation, right? Because inevitably, when you start thinking about the legacy of slavery, you start thinking about what the accountability needs to look like today.
Mm.
And practices ranging from Jim Crow to redlining have stripped wealth from the community that was already struggling to rise. Um, but it's a complicated conversation because it's not so simple as saying, white privilege is the problem, right? Or white supremacy is the problem, or any of these other terms. It requires that we get curious and really examine not just where we are, but where we've been. And so I think part of loving something is paying attention to it,
Mm-hmm.
is looking at the good, the bad, and the ugly, is looking at the power of transformation as people under difficult circumstances learn how to innovate and make good on their legacy. I mean, Burrell Memorial Hospital is a great example. It was grown out of a need because there was nowhere to serve Black folks in this region medically, and so they built a hospital, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's an extraordinary accomplishment, but that accomplishment was only achieved because there was such extreme disparity in the region, right?
Yeah.
So this delicate balance of understanding necessity versus triumph, I think, is something that we can all relate to on some level. But it does require, I think, that we take a breath and celebrate everybody, so that white folks can own Black history, immigrants can own Black history. It becomes something aspirational for all of us, and
Mm-hmm.
not something that feels like an indictment.
Yeah. Yeah. You just mentioned, and once again, here on Buzz for Good with E.B. Smith, the new executive director of the Harrison Museum of African American Culture. And you just mentioned necessity versus triumph. And
Mm-hmm.
the museum right now is poised to move out of its long-term home in Center in the Square into a new facility. Uh, I'd like to get your thoughts on that. Has that been more, from your perspective, a move made by necessity, or is it a move by triumph?
I don't want to comment too much on the move yet. We're still working on the details, and so we'll
Okay.
be making an official announcement soon. Um, but I will say that the connection between the Harrison Museum and particularly the neighborhood of Northwest Roanoke is essential. And
And
I
this is
think
this is
that,
this is the location that y'all are contemplating moving to, or you're
yes,
definitely
so
moving to. Tell us about what the opportunity is that you're still kind of dotting the i's on.
so the for sure. So the opportunity is to relocate the museum from Center in the Square to Melrose Plaza, which is the newly developed center on Melrose in Northwest, that was spearheaded by Goodwill of the Valleys. And I think it's an exciting opportunity um, to make sure that communities that the museum focuses its content on, whose stories it's telling, have access to the museum.
Yeah.
Um, it also, I think, provides the organization with a lot of opportunity to partner with other organizations that are um, very dedicatedly focused to similar missions.
Yeah.
Um,
Not
and
not just
so
African American history, but present day and future.
present day and future, and I think that's an important part of museums' identities as well as the
Hmm.
present day and the future, right?
Yeah. Right.
Museums are often thought of as these places where sort of history is entombed, but it must be leveraged to tell a story and to create narratives that can inspire future growth. And so I think the opportunity to partner with other organizations that are doing work in the present and contextualize it with all of this rich history that informs what the present is, can allow us to really leverage better outcomes.
Hmm. Hmm. What are some opportunities that you see with this move? Obviously, being better connected with perhaps a lot of people and agencies who are already affiliated. But I mean, are there other things as well? I mean, Center in the Square, it's a difficult place to access for some people.
It can, and I want to give Center in the Square their flowers, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's been an extraordinary home for the museum for a very long time, and it also provides the museum with a level of visibility that's really important. Um, it's challenging because we still live in a city that is struggling to bring those communities together effectively and organically.
Yeah.
Um, and so hopefully we can maintain the relationship with Center in the Square, and build upon it. We have great relationships with all the organizations in the building, and I think this provides an opportunity uh, to maintain those relationships and extend their reach and help to bring communities into closer contact over time as we start to develop programming at the new space.
Hmm. Again, joined here on Buzz for Good by E.B. Smith, the new executive director of the Harrison Museum of African American Culture in Roanoke. Uh, we've talked about some opportunities, but what are some particular challenges that you are facing as executive director of this museum here at the start of 2025?
Well, this is a time of extraordinary growth for the museum. It's also a time of extraordinary uncertainty for the country, and so I think all nonprofits are facing some pretty profound questions. Engagement levels across the board, across the country, are not what I think we wish they were with
Mm.
nonprofit work, particularly in the arts and culture
Hmm.
spaces. And so I think it's incumbent upon cultural institutions to really start to reimagine why they exist and what their purpose is in service of community. And so I think that's one of the things that I'm really excited about. As much as it is a challenge, I think it's an enormous opportunity as well. And I think I know I've got a board that agrees with me.
Hmm.
And we've had some wonderful conversations surrounding what the museum means to Roanoke, and specifically around what we want people to feel when they leave our space after experiencing what we give them, right? We want to provide an opportunity for people to really feel their value and know their value and understand that they matter in ways that the world doesn't always tell them that they do, and feel more closely connected to the people in this valley because, like I said, we're all in this together. So
Hmm.
the more we can build connective tissue, the more we can start to get people excited about what each other are doing and making and thinking. The more we can spur innovation, I think the better work we're going to be able to do. So those are once the challenges and the opportunity that I think in front of us. And so as an executive director, I'm sort of constantly thinking about how we construct those lattices to build those connections on.
What I love about the, again, middle-aged white guy, really just for over the last 10 years, really starting to develop a deeper understanding of African American history and culture in this country, but still a long way to go. But what I find really fascinating is that, you know, you're able to tell a national or even international story, in a little place like Roanoke, Virginia, with an
Mhm.
African American museum, or like I was just outside of Lexington, Virginia, in Brownsburg, just a wide place in the road, and they have
Yep.
a Brownsburg museum with this extraordinary exhibit right now about this one particular family there who was I don't know if you've been to this museum, but it's uh, they were slaves and were able to get their freedom, but then they immediately had to move to Liberia, but you're able to tell like this worldwide story, through the eyes of this one particular family in Brownsburg, and that's me seems like such a an incredible opportunity that's maybe unique to the African American story in the United States.
Absolutely. The African American story is a diasporan story, and I
Mm,
think when we think about what that means, we often forget about the fact that we're connected across the world to
yeah.
people. There's a tendency, I think, when we let the sort of when we let the division eat at us, to let it shrink us, to let us think that we're small, that we don't have power and expansiveness and uh, a worldliness. And I think that that's a mistake, to allow ourselves to fall into those doldrums, because I don't think that they truly. Um, I think it's a myth that we tell ourselves. Um, you know, when we imagine various art forms, I mean, I think about the Shakespeare I've done, and
Hmm.
the the classical theater I've done. The popular imagination says that we weren't part of those stories, but in fact we were. And there were people of the African diaspora all over those stories. I
Yeah.
mean, Shakespeare wrote about a few of them, but there were African folks in Queen Elizabeth's court and King James's court. Um, you know, Shakespeare wrote a lot about Venice, and Venice was an extremely metropolitan city. It was a crossroads for trade and exchange of thought and ideas. And so, I think it's important for us to remember that in a historical context, there was a lot of cultural transference, just like there is today. I mean, you look at American culture, and American culture is rife with influences that were cribbed from Black culture all along. The banjo is an African instrument.
Hmm.
Um, and so contextualizing that, I think, not only reminds people that their contributions are profound and lasting, but also that there's a big world out there, and it's all of ours to experience. You know, the hero's journey. I don't know if you're familiar with Joseph Conrad, but
Hmm.
as an artist and storyteller, he's one of my sort of touchstones. And the hero's journey is fundamentally about venturing forth, right? You have to answer the call and cross the threshold, and then go down the road of trials and meet your malevolent force and defeat it. But the most important part of that story is returning home and sharing the gift. And so, if these incredible stories of exposure to the world and connection to the world inspire Black folks to experience the world, and share their stories with their community at home, I think we've done an extraordinary job of advancing the culture and helping people lift themselves.
Bravo. To wrap up our conversation with E.B. Smith, the new executive director of the Harrison Museum of African American Culture in Roanoke, Virginia. So, in addition to a possible potential move out of Center of the Square, a complete relocation of your facility, what are some
Yep.
other what's another big thing on the horizon that people who come to the museum, wherever it's located, might experience?
Well, one of the things we're looking at intensively right now is how our programming wants to evolve to better engage the community. And one of the aspects of that is how we contextualize our collection through storytelling. So you'll see some changes as you engage with the museum as the months tick by. We'll feel less like a gallery and more like a gathering space. Um,
Hmm.
as you encounter our collection, you won't be encountering as much of it at one time as you have, but you'll be experiencing artifacts, objects in the context of much deeper stories. So understanding why the things exist, not just that they do exist, understanding what their legacies are, and really helping folks figure out how they in fact relate to and interact with these objects on a daily basis in a modern context. So we're going to be looking at, we'll get into a season announcement later, but we're going to be looking at themes housed within our collection in much more specific and nuanced ways as we move forward, which I think can help everyone that engages with the museum sort of think about how they'd like to further the story and what are the next steps that they'd like to take in community with one another.
Excellent. Well, E.B. Smith, thanks so much again for coming on to Buzz for Good, and congratulations on your new appointment as Executive Director of the Harrison Museum of African American Culture in Roanoke, Virginia.